We had just a great experience with our Cinnabon. I felt like the brand, and I'm going to say Roark in general, really cared about the profitability and the success of their franchisees. I think at that point we realized like we really wanted to try to align ourselves with another Roark-backed brand. We started looking Wingstop. They had high AUVs. Seemed like a product that we could bring to Columbus that would do well. We knew the Buffalo Wild Wings did well here in Columbus, and we opened our first Wingstop in 2013.
I know Subway was your first franchise investment. When was that, and how did you end up arriving at that brand to get your start?
Yeah, so first got into Subway in 2005. That's when I got into Subway. Man, I'm going back even further than that. Subway was my very first job. I was the only employee, worked for a family that had a local Subway here in Columbus. It's probably 12 or 13 when I started, somewhere right around there. Worked for them for a while, man, and I feel like I learned a lot from that franchisee in general. Just taught me a lot about business in general. So pretty much got an opportunity to buy one pretty much out of high school. So I was about 20 when I got into it.
Okay.
Bought a store in 2005 and then ended up acquiring a couple other stores over the following 2 or 3 years. A couple were distressed asset sales. Bought those kind of right before a $5 footlong kind of took off. So it was a really good time at that point, I guess, to jump in the brand. And that really helped us quite a bit.
So what was that like, just going through? I mean, we'll talk through the portfolio and how big you got your Subways, but what was it like when you guys launched the $5 footlong?
I think for the brand in general, I think for a lot of franchisees, it was kind of chaotic for a little bit. We were fairly well positioned as a franchisee. I actually think we had the top 2 stores as far as percentage increase in the Columbus market out of 120, believe it or not. So we just had some really good team members at that point too. We had a really good foundation that really allowed us to grow and handle those sales. Once again, it was a little bit of chaos, but somewhat controlled chaos on our end. So we were able to capitalize on it.
And how many Subways did you end up getting to before you exited that brand?
We got up to 12 Subways in the Columbus area.
Did you build them all, or was there acquisitions involved there?
No, there was, I would say, probably maybe 3/4 or so, maybe half were acquisitions. I would say a quarter were distressed asset sales, stores that just weren't doing very well that we were able to go in and either purchase from the existing franchisees or even, the bank workout departments as well. And then the other quarter were new build locations.
Okay. Something that's talked about with Subway a lot is like there's such a high unit count, right? And it's coming down now, but even so, it's still, they have way more units out there in the US than McDonald's. Do you think that's the biggest factor in why a Subway can't really increase their AUV beyond, I think it's around $500,000 today?
Yeah, no, I think it's a key component. I mean, they tend to hover around that $500,000 for the last, I would say decade or longer, to be honest with you. So good market share. Well, when you look at the total amount of stores, in the market, they get a decent amount, but they make it very hard to grow. I mean, as soon as you start doing decent volume, it seems like they want to build another one right on top. So frankly, that's one of the reasons we ended up moving past that brand. I mean, we didn't see the ability to grow any further with them.
Yeah. How did you even get into 12, right? Because I'm just thinking of like the unit economics. You've got $500,000 at best in revenue at a store, after all the franchise fees, labor costs, et cetera. I mean, you don't have much. We're talking less than 6-figure profits per store. So, I mean, how do you get to 12 when you really can't afford a GM per location? Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. That was something we struggled with early on. I'll be honest. Hey, my very first store when I bought it was doing just over $5,000 a week. So I felt the pain, if that makes sense. So we learned it's a penny profit business in general. You really got to, scrape to make it with that brand for sure. I think it was a great lesson for us in general, with the restaurant business. But one thing that we learned, in order to grow with that specific brand, you really had to focus on high volume locations. So that was where we put most of our focus. At one point, I want to say we probably had, a number of the top 10 stores in this market for sure. So we just really tried to focus on higher volume locations because we knew that could support the infrastructure needed to scale with that particular brand at that point. If you have lower volume stores, I'm going to say sub 10,000 a week, for example, I'm going back 15 years, they didn't make enough to really support that infrastructure needed to scale.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like, in some ways, maybe a good brand to like cut your teeth in, because you kind of learn what you need to be able to like maybe grow faster or in a more economical way. But either way, getting to 12 is still a pretty impressive feat. And, what was the next brand that came after that?
So I would say the next brand that came after that, kind of with it, to be honest with you, was right around 2008. We acquired a Cinnabon restaurant here in Columbus. So that was our first attempt to diversify our portfolio a little bit, and it was a great brand for us, to be honest with you. We learned a lot. That many different franchisors out there, they all operate differently. We were used to the Subway system, for example. I would say joining Cinnabon was a breath of fresh air at that point. Okay. So that was Roark Capital actually had them at that moment. So, and I believe they still own them as well. I really enjoyed the relationship with those guys. Learned a ton from them. It's actually how we kind of got into Wingstop, to be honest, as well. But yeah, so Cinnabon was our second. We ended up purchasing that location in 2008, September to be exact, right before things really started to fall out. So we felt the pain on that. I'll be honest with you. You buy it in 2008 in September, and then 2009, 2010, 2011, they were rough years, but we were able to weather the storm. And it came out pretty strong. It turned out to be a really good location in general for us. But yeah, Cinnabon was our second.
And so, was that a mall location though, or like a standalone? It was a mall.
Yeah, it was a mall location.
Okay, and what was that like? Just going from Subways, where I imagine you were mostly in strip malls, to like an enclosed mall business.
Yeah, you're in a captive audience location, so you're very reliant on the malls to really drive the traffic and drive the business. We were used to the Subways being on the street to some extent, so we could go out and just market very heavily and see the returns very quickly with those efforts. When you're in a captive audience location like that, you don't exactly have that same flexibility, I guess. So we were very dependent on the mall. Fortunately, we were positioned in a mall, Easton Town Center, that's a very prominent mall here in Columbus, and probably one of the highest, I would say, sales per square foot in the Ohio area in general, if not the highest. So that kind of helped us a little bit too.
Okay, interesting. What's that business like as far as, you obviously have the core product, like the cinnamon bun. Is it just a dead simple model? Because, for the most part, right, I don't know what the menu is like besides that. I know if you go to one today, they kind of have beverages, and I think they're doing coffee these days. I don't know if it was that developed at that point as far as what you were offering, but are the ops super simple because you do have that just core product that you're selling?
Yeah, I would say the operations are pretty simple with Cinnabon, to be honest with you. Just in general, the brand is very simple. You don't have a ton of different ingredients. You are right, you do have the drink line, which we did have back in 2008, 2009 as well. But overall, the product, the preparation, very simple. The unit economics are great. It's hard to beat. They have some very good unit economics.
Interesting. So we talk about this offline all the time, just like looking at FTDs. The AUVs are kind of low. Relative to a food, like a true standalone restaurant, which isn't a fair comparison, admittedly. Like mall locations typically have lower AUVs, but I think right now, it goes up every year. I don't know if it's because of just price inflation or what, but it's around 600 or 700 grand per location. But you think just within the single location, you can actually drive decent profit from a Cinnabon?
100%. Yeah, if you have the right location, you can do very well with it. At the time, I want to say it may have been our highest NOI store, to be honest with you. It was a very healthy store for us. I'm trying to think back in the day what numbers we were doing there. I want to just, throw out probably the 800,000 range when we got it.
Wow.
So, somewhere in that range is where it was at. And I could tell you when we purchased the store, we were selling cinnamon, rolls for $3.49 a piece. So probably half of what they're selling for these days as well. So I do agree with you, though. I do think price inflation has really inflated some of those numbers of, I'm going to say, the last 5 to 10 years for sure. But overall, I have to believe it still has good unit economics in general.
Yeah. And you said something, I think this was, I don't know, maybe last week or a few weeks ago when we were just talking about Agapé, which we'll get to that later. But did you notice there was a correlation between the price of a Cinnabon with the price of gas?
Oh, yeah, that's funny, man. We used to track that, I feel like, all the time, So our cinnamon roll is $3.49, but I swear it seemed like every single time that gas, a gallon of gas would go above $3.49, we would see a sales dip. So, it's kind of a trade-off, which one do you want, a gallon of gas or a cinnamon roll? But yeah, it was very weird, especially when those gas prices really started to spike.
And was that just like you and your owner group, or within the Cinnabon system, other franchisees were also talking about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was other people as well. That was just us. It was kind of just a running joke, to be honest with you, in general. So
I gotcha. All right, so you're building your Subways. You're 3 or 4 years into being a franchisee, and then you add Cinnabon. What's the next move? Is it an exit from Subway, or is it you add a third brand while you still have Cinnabon and the handful of Subways?
Yeah, no, we continue to add the brand. So we got Cinnabon in 2008, ran that for a couple years. I jumped in Dunkin' Donuts in 2011. Once again with Cinnabon being a captive audience location, your growth is somewhat limited. So you could certainly buy or build, other locations around Central Ohio. Unfortunately for us, some of the other mall locations were not top performers, and we just really didn't feel like they'd fit our portfolio at the time. So we found the opportunity to grow within that brand somewhat limited unless we wanted to expand pretty far outside Columbus. So we started to search for other brands that we thought would be, aligned with our portfolio and had the ability to scale in the Columbus market. And we got an opportunity to jump in Dunkin'. I want to say it's probably right around 2011. This is a Tim Hortons market, by the way. A lot of Tim Hortons around here. So
I do. I remember that. I went to
Tim
Tim Hortons when I visited your, the Agapé locations for the first time.
Yeah, so they have this market locked down to some extent, but we decided to try to run with it. We purchased the Dunkin'. Once again, this was a distressed asset sale as well in 2011, with the full intent of growing with that concept, to be honest with you. But we learned fairly quickly with that one, though, the unit economics did not make sense for us at the time. You had to have an A location, so you're paying high real estate. It was a very high build out. They're very rich on their build outs. I don't want to say they over engineer things, but they definitely over engineer things, in my opinion. We were a donut market too, a donut and sandwich market back then. So we were running extremely high cost of goods. I want to say probably in the 38% range, somewhere right around there. Couple that with, I'm going to say 11% royalties and probably around 25 to 30% labor cost. You have a slim margin within that brand. So we learned fairly quickly that we probably weren't going to be able to expand in this market with Dunkin'. So that one was short-lived. 2012, we engaged Wingstop and did a discovery day with those guys. Kind of got turned on to Wingstop through Rorik. We had just a great experience with our Cinnabon. I felt like the brand, and I'm going to say Rorik in general, really cared about the profitability and the success of their franchisees. So I think at that point we realized we really wanted to try to align ourselves with another Rorik-backed brand. We started looking Wingstop. They had high AUVs. Seemed like a product that we could bring to Columbus that would do well. We knew the Buffalo Wild Wings did well here in Columbus, and we opened our first Wingstop in 2013.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk a lot about Wingstop. Before that, I think there's a few just interesting notes on one, the local dynamics. Did you know about this Tim Hortons presence when you were going into Dunkin', or was it more after the fact? You kind of started looking around and were like, "Ooh, there's already a player here." And even beyond that, did you ever figure out who the franchisee is? I just think it's interesting. I've never heard of any market in America. I know they have hundreds of locations here now, but for the most part, it seems like a secondary brand in the coffee world.
Yeah, no, we are very familiar with them in the market. I want to say they had probably right around the range of 60 locations here in Columbus, at that point. So
Holy crap.
They had a ton, man. They had the corners locked down here. So we were definitely aware of them. I think we liked the Dunkin' brand. We felt like the volumes were decent for the stores that we were looking into that we did know here. We just felt like we could go in and maybe run them slightly better possibly and maybe capitalize on that a little bit. So that's kind of what turned us on to that. I just think after the fact, when you started to really dive into the numbers a little bit more and the expectations for the brand at that point, we found that it just wasn't going to be probably a good fit long-term for us. And it'd probably be a challenging market to grow and scale quickly in.
Yeah. Before we get to Wingstop, my final question on your prior portfolio then is, well, I have a few. For Cinnabon, this is totally speculative. I'm just curious. Because now Rorik is pushing through the Focus brand, or I think it's called Go-To Foods now. Rorik is pushing these kind of standalone Cinnabon locations. Sometimes they're co-branded with Annie Ann's. Just what do you think of that based on what you know and remember from Cinnabon?
Great model.
Yeah.
If we could have built them, we would have done it.
Oh, really?
You get the benefit of, both brands in one. They can, cooperate. I think it's a great move for them, especially in those locations that they may be challenged for real estate. If you're able to squeeze both brands in, let's just say 600 to 800 square feet or so, I think it's great for unit economics in general. So,
oh, interesting. Yeah,
I love the idea. I love the idea. There was an Annie Ann's right in the mall with us as well that was, at the time doing well north of $1 million. So very strong brand as well. I believe similar economics, unit economics too. So once again, if you can combine both in a single footprint right there, I think it's a win-win.
I think what I'm getting at, and this is purely just from the customer perception, I'm used to only seeing those brands in the malls. So, there's almost I mean, I haven't been to a mall in years at this point, but I just, or if it's an airport, I think that's the last time I got any answers. I was in an airport and you just smelled it. I was like, yep, I'm going to pull out my credit card and buy some pretzels now. Like you
Yeah,
kind of lose
sorry.
that effect in
I
the,
may have misunderstood. So, are you talking about going outside the mall? There are challenges with that? Or are you just saying in general, like,
yeah, well,
trying
yeah, I was mainly just asking, yeah, what, like, yeah, do you,
so from that standpoint, I'm not a fan of it. I think it's tough to do. I mean, you see
yeah,
Cinnabon, you see even Krispy Kreme and some of those other guys trying to go and, or partner, I'm going to say, with, man, Taco Bell, McDonald's, Wendy's. I mean, it seems like anything they can do to get the brand exposure to some extent or get the product in people's hands. I think if you can do it that way, it's all right. I've seen a handful of them that are more of, like you said, like just standalone locations outside captive audience areas. I don't know if I'd take the risk on that one. I'll be honest with you.
yeah, okay, no, that tracks. That's where I thought you were going to go. So, all right, so Wingstop. I'm not familiar with this, and it might be just interesting for everyone listening to know. What was Rourke's involvement with them? Because then I feel like it was different then. Did they own them and then spin them off in an IPO, or did they just buy shares in the public market? I feel like there was something a little bit different than their normal playbook.
No, they owned them when we got
Okay.
into it. They probably owned them for maybe a year or two by the time we ended up getting in. They did spin them off and go public, I believe, around 2015 or 2016. But no, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know the exact ownership structure, but to the best of my knowledge, they were certainly the majority owner when we entered the brand.
Okay, and Wingstop today, right? It's just like been on a rocket ship for a
Powerhouse,
while.
man. Powerhouse. We got out too early.
Yeah. Well, what was the AUVs when you got into Wingstop in 2013? What was just the vibe of the brand at that point?
Yeah, so they were probably right around a million, maybe even a touch over a million when we ended up getting into the brand. I want to say the brand kind of went through a little bit of a transformation, from 2012 to 2015. It seemed like they really started to get away from what I'm going to say the airplane theme of Wingstop was and maybe focus more on sports or flavor, which I think ultimately was a really, really, really smart move for them in general. Didn't know what to think of it at the time, but they had great leadership. Really highly respect Charlie Morrison and his leadership when he was there. He got in probably right around the same time I did. They just had a really good team. They made some very smart decisions, great marketing, and that brand took off. I mean, it took off, so it's done very well since.
When you say airplane theme, what do you mean? What was the marketing?
I'm going to say more of like a hangar theme, if like think just airplanes in general, propellers on the wall, like
Oh, wow.
stuff
Okay.
like that. I mean, airplane murals. So yeah, the very first store we built, that's what was in there.
Holy crap. Okay, I didn't even know that was like a theme of the restaurant at one point.
Yeah, yep.
And at this point too, 2013, have you exited Subway yet or no?
Had not exited Subway, no. So when
Oh,
we got into Wingstop, had a handful of Subways. I don't know exact count, but I would probably say at least 8 at that point. I think I had Dunkin still. I had Cinnabon still. We even had our own brand called Flip Spot. It was a fast casual burger concept as well.
oh,
Um,
whoa! I didn't
yeah.
know this.
Like
Wow.
I kind of skipped over that. We were in a lot of different things at once, I feel like, maybe too many. So we
Sure.
developed our own burger concept back in 2009. It actually surprisingly did fairly well for us. We found it to be more of a distraction at the time. I kept it for about 5 years, had solid sales, year over year, good year over year growth, laid a small footprint in a mall that we were familiar with right here in Columbus, and it performed well. But what we found is that it was at that point, it was more of a distraction for us. So we ended up letting that go
Oh, well,
and
that's
just focus on Wingstop.
yeah. Okay, so man, I didn't know that. Did you sell it or did you just close it down?
Yeah, we sold it.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, we sold it. I think it stayed open until the lease ran out, maybe 2018 or so. But yeah, it was a good store, man. It had good potential. So,
interesting. Were you doing smash burgers or just like regular burgers?
I mean, I would consider them smash burgers now. I don't know if that was necessarily a term so much
Yeah,
back then, but it was fresh, never frozen beef. I mean, that straight on the grill. So, I mean, yeah,
yeah.
close enough, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, with Wingstop, I mean, we've talked a little bit about the operations of Cinnabon, and then even with Dunkin'. What was that like with Wingstop? Because we've had another franchisee who has spoken about ops, and it's not easy. It's feels like an assembly line is kind of the quote from the former franchisee. But how did you feel entering that brand compared to what you had known from operating all these other brands at that point?
Yeah, Wingstop was interesting. From our experience, I wouldn't say it was extremely complex. There were some challenges just because you're dealing with raw product. So you do have to take that into consideration. But if you think about it, coming from the Dunkin world, every order's customized, pretty much every single order. So I would say Wingstop in that area was more simplistic. I could see how somebody could relate it to more of an assembly line. You're pumping out a lot of volume. You got people in specific places, good throughput with the brand. They rearranged the kitchen a time or two when we were in the brand to kind of help expedite that process a little bit. But overall, I don't feel like the operations were extremely challenging. I just feel you had to be maybe a little bit more cautious just dealing with raw product and stuff.
Yeah. For building locations, because I think you got up to 8 or 10, were you building them? Were you acquiring them off existing franchisees?
Yeah, so we built all of our locations that we had in Columbus. I was even involved in construction, another company that we were a partner in that we built other locations around Ohio too. We built for ourselves and we built for other franchisees in the Ohio area.
Got it. And at this point, I mean, you're coming up on like 10 years of being a restaurant owner. Was there lessons learned for site selection that helped you with Wingstop? And, was it similar locations to any of your other prior brands that you were, a part of?
We definitely learned a thing or two with Wingstop. I think we probably learned more with the development of Wingstop than any other brand, just because the majority of the other locations that we owned at that point were acquisitions. So we really started to, I'm going to say, cut our teeth on the development side of things with Wingstop. Oh man, I could go through a handful of things that we learned. I would say one thing that we learned with Wingstop, though, that was kind of interesting is, I'll actually go back to my very first location. Wingstop actually denied it. But I had a high volume Subway that was in the top 5 locations in Columbus out of 120 stores. And there was a space right next door. Now, Subway typically does the majority of their volume at lunchtime. This particular store probably did a majority of their business at dinner time, if not at least equal to their lunchtime business. So to me, it felt like we had a very good dinner. It was a very good dinner spot, in other words. And if we're going to build Wingstop somewhere, let's try it where we know that, there's good dinner business. So on paper, it did not line up with what Wingstop would like to have. But they approved the location eventually. They let us build it. It opened up very good. It was a very good location, much higher than we would have thought, and we perform it out. So since then, I probably, I'd say that I'm very big on what others are doing in the market as far as sales volume goes. The numbers are nice. The data's nice. It's great. I think it's good to look at it. But I also think you got to take into consideration, what others are doing too, and where, what kind of volumes you're seeing out of these others. Because on paper, we did not fit the criteria for a Wingstop. And this, by the way, I don't think was the only location that didn't fit their mold that we built that did very well. So I think just knowing some of the other sales with some of the other food users played a huge part in our development. And I think that really aided to developing locations that were successful in other areas too.
And so when you talk about it not fitting the mold, is it like a population density thing or just
either daytime or total population? I'll give you an example. I want to say the threshold was maybe 40,000 people within 2 miles, if I recall, going back a little bit more than 10 years on that. So I may be off slightly, but I believe that's what they were looking for. And we were below that. We were probably 30,000 within 2 miles. But it was a nice hub. It was a nice center. There was a lot of food users that were doing very well in that center. And although we didn't have the population in the direct, right in the 2 mile vicinity, we knew that people were coming there.
That's fascinating. I think kind of looking at adjacent businesses in the area and seeing their success can just be a really good proxy for the potential of, whatever your concept is.
I'll tell you, I've talked to some others and seen some other deals that people have done where you look on paper and these numbers that you would think a location would crush it just based on the numbers. And then they put a location in and it's a dud. But then you go talk to some of the other food users really close by and they're not performing really well either. So yeah, I rely on that a lot. I'll be honest with you. I love the data from, I'm going to say, other sales. And I rely on that pretty heavily, to be honest with you, from a development perspective.
As far as like the construction and like the actual building of a store, have you found contracting that out? Like, just did you have because most of, or if not all of your work has been in the Columbus area, right? I don't think actually you did tell me, which we'll get to with Wingstop, you go outside, but are you just working with third parties? Or I feel like you may have mentioned on a prior conversation that we had that sometimes you actually kind of have a GC that does it and it's your company as well.
Yeah. So I was a partner in a GC going back to probably 2012, 2013. very good friend of mine that I've worked with for a long time. He's built pretty much every store that we've had except for one, the very first one we built. So we partnered with him in 2012, 2013 timeframe to kind of help scale, our business. And we've built stores for ourselves, but we've also built a store. I would say maybe been involved in probably north of 50 other locations in general. I would say between other brands and Wingstop throughout Ohio and Northern Virginia. So we've built other locations in Akron, Canton, Toledo, Cincinnati, Dayton, Ohio as well, outside of Columbus. And then we had a couple locations that we did in Northern Virginia as well. So we do contract it out, though. We don't have our own MEP team or anything of that nature. So we do act as a true GC in that manner.
Yeah. Okay. And as you're building out Wingstop, what's your labor kind of structure look like? And I'm talking more about almost like your corporate overhead for your franchise, because you have maybe 10 or 12 Subways. You've still got the Dunkin. I don't know if you still have the Cinnabons, but how are you scaling like basically all these different, you could probably have multiple GMs, maybe area directors. Did you become close with some bigger franchisee who mentored you, or like how'd you figure out what to do on that front?
Yeah, no, we kind of just scaled ourselves. We did have managers in every single store. We had a good solid infrastructure inside the four walls. I would say the team is everything. I'm sure everybody will agree with that. I mean, if you have the right team, the possibilities are pretty endless to some extent. So we had a great team in general. Above store level, we had in-house accounting, and then we had our area managers that would overlook the locations. I want to say with the Subways at, maybe a dozen Subways, we probably had two. And on the Wingstop side, we had one. One thing I would say that was kind of key for our growth is, and we did this very early on, is we streamlined all of our, I'm going to say, internal tools so that they could be used, throughout other brands. So we were very consistent with that. We cross-trained our team as well so that we could have managers that could not only understand the Subway brand, but maybe understand the Cinnabon and the Wingstop brand as well. And that was really, really, really helpful for us. So as opportunities present themselves and people could jump over to other brands, they immediately were able to get in the brand, understand the system tools, and really just run with it. So that's probably one thing that I think allowed us to scale with other brands in a very efficient way, is just having those system tools that were somewhat universal.
And that consistency is just key for being able to build a team that can be able to jump into multiple brands. So for Wingstop, man, by 2018, I think that's the year you exited most of your locations. Can you just tell us how many locations you owned at that point, and then also within Wingstop, and then also what had changed? How had the brand transformed? Because it went through an IPO. It's obviously been on a very positive upward trajectory. So what strides were made though from that 2012, 2013 to 2018 timeframe?
Yeah, so you're right. 2018, we sold the majority of them. I believe we had 9 locations open and operating. I believe we had 2 others under development at that time. We also had a development agreement with Wingstop in Columbus and Northern Virginia. But we ended up selling 7 in Columbus to one gentleman and 2 to another larger group for the Northern Virginia stores. As far as a transformation goes, I don't know if I would say from the brand itself, other than just the rebranding of Wingstop, in that I'm going to say 2013 to 2015 timeframe. One thing that we definitely started to see from a growth standpoint is probably more of the PE-backed, buyers coming in, it seemed like, between, I'm going to say 2000. I mean, the IPO, I think, really put Wingstop on the map to some extent. And they gained a lot of attention from that. So in a way, we kind of saw that with Dunkin' too, because when I got into Dunkin', I want to say it was probably within 6 months they went IPO. So we kind of went through that process with Dunkin' too and saw something similar. But I don't know if I would say there was a big transformation. We started to, get into more of the online digital type presence or ordering as well. So I think that was another avenue that helped accelerate the growth of the brand. And then just in general, unit count, brand awareness, much better on a national level. We were the second store in Ohio. Yeah, the first store in Ohio was up on, I believe it was Mentor on the Lake up north, and they opened in 2006. So we were pretty fresh in Ohio in 2012. Nobody really understood the brand or knew the brand, I want to say, in Columbus. But we were pretty surprised at how quickly the brand seemed to be embraced and took off in the Columbus market. And, as we built more, I think it just helped with the overall brand awareness and sales for all locations.
And why do you think, though, they've been able to do so well? Because there's so much competition in chicken, and there's a lot of players, frankly, who do phenomenal, from Chick-fil-A to Raising Cane's and, Zaxby's is regional, but they crush it in their, kind of southern-ish market, southeast, let's call it. What about Wingstop, like, has done well relative to, say, a Buffalo Wild Wings? Like, why hasn't B-Dubs been able to perform at Wingstop's level?
Just my opinion, of course, but I think there's a number of things. I think one thing I saw very early on with Wingstop that was very good is they were very good at stair-stepping their sales. So they would pull certain levers at certain times, it seemed like, that would allow the sales to kind of jump, but not be overwhelming. In 2015, 2016 or so, you probably could have pulled a lot of different levers between, I'm going to say delivery, even digital ordering, just different things that you could do. Wingstop was very good about stair-stepping those things up. And I think that allowed them to grow responsibly to some extent. Their AUVs, I'm going to say, which obviously attracted, other franchisees too. And I think beyond that, they've just done a great job with their marketing and connecting with the younger demographic. I think that's huge. I wouldn't say that we were not capturing the younger demographic as much in 2013 or so when we first opened, but I would say by the time I was exiting, it was very noticeable that we were getting a lot more of the younger demographic coming through the doors. So yeah. I think that helped them tremendously too.
Do you think is there anything product related that drove, I mean, obviously, right, like I feel like it's table stakes. You got to have decent food. You have to get the orders right, so you got to execute on those things. But I don't know, like limited time offers or just different flavors, like anything like that maybe could have played a role or?
Man, I'll tell you, they had a very simplistic menu and they did not change things up a whole lot when I was in. So the LTOs were very limited. I do think the flavors in general, keep people coming back. People tend to gravitate towards what they like. And if they have a good, consistent product, they keep coming back. Wingstop, put a model together where they could execute fairly well on that. And in the recent years, I think they've been more innovative. During my stint with them, I wouldn't say they were extremely innovative. I actually think they probably took more products off the menu than put on during that time frame. In recent years, I think with like the chicken sandwich and stuff like that, that's probably helped them a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, I just think, overall, just great branding, great marketing. If you can operate right and deliver the good product, you're probably going to retain those sales too.
Yeah. You sold, and I'm curious, just given the run that Wingstop's been on, and you said it before that you sold too early, but what was the thought? I imagine still like that it was a very positive outcome for you, but was that it? Was it mainly like, hey, let's get a liquidity event. Let's take some chips off the table here?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I've been in the restaurant business for a long time. So at that point, it's probably almost 20 years, maybe a little bit longer. So I was at a point where I wanted to do something different, or at least I thought I did. Wingstop was a tough brand to operate from a customer standpoint, employee standpoint. So from an operational standpoint, product standpoint, it's fairly simplistic. But from an employee and a customer standpoint, it can have its moments depending on where these locations are positioned. Some of our locations were in slightly rougher areas, so they were a little bit more challenging. And, that's one thing that I think when you go from operating some of these other locations, such as a Subway or a Dunkin or even a Cinnabon, you have to think about Cinnabon. People are typically going there, they're excited, they're getting a treat, they're happy. Wingstop is doing 70% of its business after 5 p.m. So people are, maybe not in the best of moods. So a little bit more challenging. So I would say, in a weird way, that probably played a role as well. It was a challenging brand at times. And, we were just at a point where we were ready to try something else and get into something else as well. So in order to do that, we felt like we had to clear our plate. I started a family right around that time too. So I think that was probably another big one for us because, my wife and I think our end goal was to get ourselves to a good, stable point financially to where we could enjoy the time with our family. So we wanted to kind of capitalize on that while our kids were young, and that kind of impacted our decision too.
I think it's a really understandable decision. And is it around this time that you started thinking of Agapé or after the sale in the coming years? I mean, I know the first location opened in 2021, but when did the idea really come to mind for you?
Yeah, so I'm going to go way back on this. I would say the idea was probably around the 2009, 2010 timeframe. So I may have told you this story before. A good friend of mine now was one of the very first bankers we worked with, and asked to go to lunch one day and told him it's your pick. I'm a hamburgers, hot dogs, pizza type person. I do not venture out very far, with that. So he's like, there's this Mediterranean place that just opened down the street. Let's go check this out. I'm like, oh man, I don't know. Let's see if I can find something there. I'll be all right. I'll make it work. But I go to this place and this place is packed. It's a D location, line to the door at noon. And these guys, they're packed. So standing there, waited, got our food, sat down, tried it. It was actually very good. Just got a pita. It was very good. I wouldn't even be surprised if I went back to the same place, that evening. I was impressed with what they were doing. Got to know the owner of that location, which is now my partner in Agapé. And he was doing numbers that were putting my Subways to shame. So looking at the operation, talking to him and everything, I just had a really good gut feeling that this kind of product could scale and, could do very well. His assembly line format and the way that he was doing things in this particular location was not the same as we're doing with Agapé now. So I felt like there was some opportunity to streamline those operations and get more people through quicker too. I tried to talk him into partnering with me probably for the better part of 10 years. And we remained good friends through the whole time in general. He's done a great job. He's opened numerous Mediterranean restaurants that have been very successful as well. But long story short, after I sold all the restaurants, he called me and said, hey, I think I want to take a run at this and see if we can partner. So this is probably 6 months after I sold everything. And I am bored at this point. I'm not one that can sit around. I just can't sit around, to be honest with you. I do a little bit of real estate on the side. It's very slow moving most of the time with real estate. So
yeah,
I feel like I got to have 5 deals in the works at once at least to, to stay busy. But so I think it was just the right timing, called me in 2019. And of course I'm game. I want to go at it. I think restaurant business is one of those things. Once you get in your blood, it's hard to get out. So we formed a partnership in late 2019. We started developing the brand or working on the brand in 2020. And man, we signed a lease right before COVID hit for our first location. And it was just bad timing with that. But it all worked out great. It worked out perfect. And we opened our first store in 2021. So Johnny's my partner on the culinary side. Does a great job. Very successful with his locations, man. And, it's been a key for the Agapé growth and success of that brand.
Totally. That's amazing, too, that it was a whole decade of just basically or the timing never really lined up. So it's cool to see it kind of come full circle. And when you launched Agapé location number 1, were you setting it up from day one to be a franchise? Or, was it up in the air at that point?
No, we didn't. We were not setting it up to be a franchise at that point. We were looking to just build a nice, brand that we could scale, get to a handful of stores ourselves and have a nice business. I felt like we could probably get to that. I'm going to say 20, 30, maybe even a little bit more. I don't want to say fairly easily, but it's achievable. In other words, just because we were able to do it with the other brands and kind of had a game plan to some extent with it. I think what we kind of learned after we opened a couple of the first early stores, they opened up stronger than we thought they would. And just the overall unit economics made more sense to franchise. So we were kind of tossing around the idea in general. Johnny did not come from a franchise background. I did. And I think that what we kind of came to a conclusion is that if we want to scale this and grow it a little bit quicker, I think opening up the brand to franchise partners is going to allow us to achieve the growth that we'd like to do with this brand. And I think the unit economics makes sense to do it as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anyone we're talking to, right, can see the FTD, but we're talking 16% profit margins after all fees and a GM salary and anywhere from a 2 to 3 year payback, depending on tenant improvement allowance being included. So you guys were dead on with the economics being franchisable. And what did you think, though, about the category? Kava, I'm in New York, so there's a few others in this area. But from a national standpoint, how did you evaluate it when you did make the decision to franchise?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll jump back a little bit on this too. I actually think maybe if Johnny and I would have partnered even early on, I don't know if we would see the same type of sales or growth that we've seen in the recent years with Agapé as well. I think the category in general, Kava's done a very good job, of really paving the way for the Mediterranean category. And I'm hoping we can capitalize on that as well. I think there's enough market share out there to have multiple players. I think the category is becoming more and more accepted by the masses. And I think seeing that and seeing the growth in the recent years is just maybe that has also played an impact on our thought process with franchising as well. I think we're a little bit more comfortable that the brand and the category can work in multiple areas.
Yeah. Even, this may be backing up a little bit, but just for you as an entrepreneur, what was it like? You already had given it a go with your own brand, with the burger brand that you sold, but what was this like with Agapé? Where rather than being a franchisee, you're kind of back to, okay, I have to figure out the supply chain. I have to figure out and create the logo and the website. What was all that like for you? Is that fun? Was there unforeseen or unexpected challenges along
There's
those lines?
always there's always unforeseen and expected challenges, but I would say it's fun and it's challenging. And I enjoy that. I
Yeah.
enjoy that. It's something different. It's something new, to some extent new. We, like you kind of mentioned, we did a little bit of that with the burger concept as well. I think the thing that I'm probably most excited about, or was most excited about as well when we did it, is that in those prior 10, 15 years, we learned a lot from some really good brands as well. And when you're able to kind of take what you've learned and apply it to your own brand like that, I think it allows us to maybe, I don't want to say like learn from our own mistakes, but maybe learn from others to some extent and, just build the brand for success. So there's definitely challenges with it, but I think we kind of had a little bit of a head start just based on experience.
Totally. Well, yeah, I mean, let's talk about like the format. I mean, anyone who's been to Chipotle or Cava would understand the format. I mean, it's like the classic, just make your own bowl. How does that operationally compare to all the other brands we've talked about, right? Cinnabon, Subway, Dunkin. Where does Agape stack for you? Because you've built 6 of them in Columbus,
Yeah.
so you've got plenty of experience building and running these things. How does it stack up from an ops standpoint?
So we still deal with a raw product, just like Wingstop. So there are your challenges with that, although I would say it's minimal. It's not overly challenging. In general, our product, I think our operations are very simple. We don't have a ton of different options there, which is good and bad. It's one of those things where, we just try to hyper focus on what we know we're good at. We try to be the best at it, deliver good product, good flavor. And I like to think our operations are probably even more simplistic than some of the other brands out there that we've been involved in. I'm going to tell you, Cinnabon is just drop dead simple. Can't trump that. That's,
Yeah.
it's super easy to grab a Cinnabon and, put in a box and, ring them out real quick and move on. But as far as any of the other, I'm going to say made to order type concepts, I'd put us up there with all of them, man. It's super simple. We can roll a ton of orders out very quickly. I'm going to say 100 plus, customers per hour at some of these stores with ease. And, we're staffing 7 people, 8 people to do that. So you're getting a lot of people through a lot of revenue and very quickly. I'd love the challenge to go in a higher density area, man. I think we crush it. I just think that
Yeah.
we can perform very well. So overall, though, operations, I would say, are very
No,
simple.
well, yeah. I mean, when JT and I first visited, I did some secret shopping and just asked like a few civilians as well as even the hotel front desk person. I was just like, "Hey, we're in town for a business meeting, but I got to eat lunch because it's not for a few hours. I'm craving Mediterranean. Is there any good Mediterranean spots?" Just to see if she'd name drop Agape. And first answer was like, "Oh, you got to try this spot called Agapé. It's like the Chipotle of Mediterranean." And I was like, "That's a good sign." So clearly, you built like in the Columbus market. You have a great reputation. And I know this is speculative, but like, how do you see the category and just this Mediterranean kind of battle, if you will, evolving? Right, like Akava's only in 26 states, so
Mhm.
it, they absolutely have educated the consumer and done a great job of paving the way. So now there is opportunity for other brands to take advantage of that. But yeah, and someday they're going to be in Columbus, right? So how do you just view maintaining your economics and maybe even differentiating a little bit so that Agape does kind of, and I know there's a few menu items in particular that I was like, I've never seen that at Akava. But yeah, how do you think about that longer term?
Yeah, so I think there's enough market share out there for a lot of players in this category, to be honest with you. And I think the category in general is probably, I'm going to say, on that hockey stick curve right now, right at the bottom where it's really starting to take off. So I think there's going to be a lot of different players. In a weird way, I kind of feel like, Cava, even coming to Columbus or some of these other markets is, like I mentioned earlier, they're kind of paving the way for the category. We're trying to differentiate ourselves through just flavor and some product offerings. You obviously have Chipotle, you have Qdoba, you have Moe's, you have a number of different, fast casual Mexican restaurants in that area. And they're all successful. They all have successful locations. So I think that just like that, I think Agape and I think a handful of these other guys, they have plenty of room to grow. There's plenty of area to grow. Like you said, Cava's in 26 states, man. What do they have? 400 locations right now, somewhere right around there. They've grown very well over the last few years. But ultimately, I think it's going to be a flavor preference. I think menu items, if you can differentiate yourself through different offerings, will be helpful as well. And then, location, convenience, I think will be another factor too.
Yeah, I totally agree on the category. And I mean, that's a big part of why JT and I were excited to, after we visited the stores, saw the economics, wanted to partner. Because it's just, I mean, every category has room for multiple players. Pizza has the big four, subs has the big four, burgers, fried chicken. I have like 10, 15 concepts each where you can do well. So, and then, yeah, as dominant as Chipotle is, I mean, there is Qdoba, there is Moe's, who each have 500 to 700 locations each. So it's just so rare for a category to not have multiple winners. So I remember speaking a while back to this guy who passed on Five Guys in like 2000. So he was like, like there's McDonald's, there's Wendy's, there's Burger King. There's no room for anyone else. And I mean, obviously, just couldn't have been more wrong. And he would be the first to admit that. So, yeah, we love where the category is at. Because, I'm not going to ask you to talk poorly about any other brand, but it's no secret that there's been other brands. If someone does research, they'll see there's other Mediterranean brands that either have tried or are kind of trying. And none have seemed to really been able to take off. So, yeah, I guess I'm curious. Why do you think that is? Obviously, I have my own thoughts, but why do you think that is? And what is Agapé maybe doing differently from in-store to even like our franchising strategy, which we've talked a lot about internally?
Yeah, this is just my opinion, in all honesty. If you look at some of the other guys out there that have been in the market, even in the market for a long time, I'm going to reference Roadie, for example. I mean, they were in a top 20 metro areas as well. And, they haven't seen quite the success I think they were hoping to see. But a lot of these guys seem to be more corporate owned focused. They haven't really pulled the franchising lever. I think that's something that will help differentiate us as well, allowing us to maybe grow a little, I'm going to say quicker, but also have good partners engaged. It's tough to operate stores, from a distance. So I think that's a struggle sometimes with some of these brands. It seems like a lot of them kind of start to stall out between like 30 and 50 units too. I don't know exactly why. It seems to work that way. It seems like if you can get over that 50 or 100, then you can start to really grow, but they stall out between 50 or, I'm going to say less than 50. Yeah, I respect all of those brands, Naya, Hummus, Republic. You got Brassica here that's local. They do a great job too. I think there's a lot of room in the category for a lot of these different brands. But I think ultimately what it will come down to is it's going to come down to the team. If you have a good product, you have good operations, it's going to come down to the team. Probably unit economics to some extent. I think that's one key differentiator for us as a brand and as a franchise is I think we have the unit economics to kind of back up the growth, and they make sense. Like you kind of said earlier, I mean, we're seeing with our stores, right now per the FTD, a 2 to 3 year payback. I'm going to say a 2 year even with TI factored in. One key metric I always try to focus on is, we want to do 3 times, whatever our build out cost is, we want to do 3 times that in sales. So if our net build out, for example, is 400,000, we want to see at least 1.2 million in sales. We're hyper focused on those metrics too. So I think doing that will help set us apart as well and allow us to scale.
Yeah. And as far as franchisees, meaning myself, we haven't really published anything online regarding this, but we're only really working with existing restaurant franchisees on the concept. So, and that ultimately comes from you as what you wanted when we first talked about franchising this back in February, March, right? You made it clear, hey, I think that's important for the system. So do you want to just maybe expand on like why that's your vision for the brand and where did that come from? If it was inspiration from another brand or just, anything?
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's absolute key. I mean, I've seen it so many times. I mentioned before, we had a number of distressed asset sales that we purchased within other brands. A number of those. Actually, I'm going to say all of them now that I can think about it because I'm just kind of running through my head of those specific situations. I'm pretty sure all of those deals had individuals that did not have prior restaurant experience. So I've seen it, many times where that experience really pays dividends if you have it. And I think that they have a much higher probability of success, and we need great growth partners. So I think especially out of the gate, making sure they have restaurant experience is key. I'd even add a couple more things. I'm going to say, multi-unit experience. I think we put in there, no less than 5, in the market of their choice. I think that's crucial to have that experience and have that market knowledge. I think having an existing infrastructure in place too is key to growth. And once you get to that 5, or I'm going to say, upwards, you probably have that infrastructure in place to allow you to scale with another brand. And then, I'm going to say a 4th is just, having a little bit of financial depth to where you can get in and build multiple stores in a market. I think that's what really allows the economics to kind of play out positively when you can build, 2 or 3 stores in a market fairly quickly, get that brand awareness, lock it in, and then, start to scale, I think is helpful. So yeah, having that infrastructure and experience with somebody will allow them to do that much quicker.
100%. I mean, I think it's something every brand probably would want to do in theory, but it doesn't always work, right? We've seen it work with like Dave's Hot Chicken, or Seven Brew seems to be going with that approach. But yeah, we obviously love the strategy. And I think part of our calculus too was just like when you line everything up from the unit economics of the stores, which you've talked about, the category as well, right? It is more than big enough for multiple players. And we're at that point where it's not saturated by any means. It's not even, we're just in the beginning of the real growth. And right, it's not like this trendy, it's not a category you have to be worried about, is this a fad or not? And on top of that, you also get what we've seen with these concepts and these brands is you get the perception from a customer standpoint of that it's basically the health halo of a salad concept, but the food's way better at Agapé or a Mediterranean concept. Like, right, you get more flavors, it's much more craveable. So, and I know you've seen that in your customers and right the amount that they're coming back to Agapé, but I'd love to hear about, you're at 6 stores. I know the full focus, right, is on franchising, and we just started having conversations with franchise owners about this a few weeks ago. So it's brand spanking new. But I think what's interesting is even with as good as your economics are at the corporate stores, you've only priced the bowls at $9, right?
Yeah, $9.85, man. We've hey, look, it's something that's important to us is just to be fair with people,
Yeah.
Like we're not trying to price gouge on our product. We just want people to come in and have a good experience, have at a fair value. And I think that's what's allowing us to have, same store sales increases and build more stores is just treating the customer right. That's important to us. So I think there's room to grow with that. Obviously other markets may command a little bit higher, bowl prices. But in general, I think it's a very fair price. And, we've tried to operate in that manner. So.
Yeah, well, I guess that's a good point. I mean, where do you see, just for context for me, I mean, in New York, you can't leave a Cava or whatever it is without a Sweet Green, wherever you're going for a bowl. I mean, you're leaving those places, it's $17 to $19. That's crazy. So do you think you're still a little bit underpriced in Columbus, or do you think it actually is, right around where you should be, or could you take $1 or $2?
No, I think we're definitely probably underpriced. The strategy out of the gate was to, just gain market share and encourage trial. We're probably a little, lower on the price right now, but I think there's plenty of room to take price. We will end up taking price later this year. It'll be our second price increase since we've opened. So we've tried to hold steady as much as we can. But it's not going to be at a point where it's, I think, obscene to people. I know there's a local competitor. I actually looked at some pricing the other day, and they're almost $17 for a bowl here in Columbus. It's like, they do well, but at some point, I think that's going to start to wear on people, and they're going to question that. Some of these brands, as you've kind of seen, their AUVs continue to go up, right? But my fear is maybe their foot traffic is slipping a little bit.
Yep.
They're getting those AUVs due to, I'll give you an example. Our local Wingstop, for example, sells a 30 family pack for $45 right now. When we were in the brand and when I exited, we were, I believe, $27.49. So you're looking at, more than a 50% increase alone just in price. So I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely, depending on the brand and their local market, it can be tough sledding for some of these franchisees. I know like KFC, as an example, they're as a brand just in a tough time. But for Agapé, do you have on hand how many bowls you'll sell like in a given year? Like maybe let's take this year with across your 6 stores.
It's a wide range, but I'm going to tell you it'll be between 500,000 and a million total. So I don't know the exact number, but it'll be somewhere right around there between the 6 stores.
Yeah, so $1 price increase, you're dropping $500,000 at least to your bottom line.
Straight to the bottom line with just $1, and that's on the low end of a $500,000 bowls.
Yeah,
it's pretty staggering if you look at it that way, and that's just $1.
Yeah.
So, I think some of these other markets, for example, would probably command a much higher price. So I think just from a unit economic standpoint, it could be rather interesting in some of these other markets that you're probably going to realistically still be on an affordable end, but be $11 or $12 a bowl too.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting. We've got some exciting conversations already on the way, so it'll be fun to see, just how high we can push the bar in these other markets. Yeah, I guess the final question here on this all, how big do you think Agapé can be? And, do you have a target unit count that you think this concept can get to and that you want to see it get to?
I don't have a specific number in my head. I think more important than anything, man, we just want to work with good people, good franchise partners, build a kick-ass brand in general, and just be successful together. So it's probably at this point with this brand, it's more important to me, and I think my partners in general, just to work with good people, we're not at a point where we're just trying to sell units, for example.
Yeah.
It needs to be a good fit for them. It needs to be a good fit for us. And let's just grow a good brand together. I think that's where we're at. And, if it takes us to 100, if it takes us to 500, 1,000 or more, then great. Hopefully all go for the ride together. So
Yeah.
I don't have a specific number that we're targeting. I just want to do whatever we can to enjoy the ride there.
Totally. Well, yeah, I mean, I think with kind of Kava laying the blueprint out and your success in Columbus with 6 stores, I think there's definitely a ton of white space ahead for the brand. So, yeah, I mean, obviously existing franchisees and restaurant owners listening to this, get in touch with us. But yeah, Matt, this was a lot of fun to talk, hear your journey and get it out to the world. So yeah, man, we'll have to get you on. Maybe when we cross some milestone with Agapé, whether it's 50, 100, or however many locations open. But in the meantime, is there anywhere where people can follow you or the brand online?
Yeah, I mean, the best place to, check us out is probably just going to be our website in general. So eatagape.com. If you're interested in the franchise side of things, we have a franchise link there where people can learn a little bit more about the brand and the opportunities as well. So yeah, that's point them in that direction.
All right, awesome. Well, folks, we'll have that link in the show notes to both the restaurant website and the franchise website. Matt, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Totally, man.